Welcome to the Faith and Business Podcast. I am your host, Elle Edwards, founder of the Faith and Business Playground, here with Bible-friendly brain gymnastics, mentoring, and this podcast to help you embrace your inner weirdo so you can choose happy every single day. Why? Because I want Jesus geeks like you so full to the top with God's love, smiling most of the time, God helping you, so that together we can reclaim what it means to be Christian. Now, all this week in the podcast, we've been thinking about uncertainty. This is the final episode in our little mini-series. And if you've missed a few episodes, don't worry, you can go back and catch up. And I should mention as well, if you are a member of the Playground, don't forget that all of this content is safely stored in our members vault as well. So it's really easy and categorized, so it's easy for you to find if you need it in a few weeks or months' time. So no panic there. Oh, and if you're not a member of the Playground, come and join us. Where have you been? faithandbusinessplayground.com is where you want to go to find out more and join us today. Anyway, moving swiftly on, we have been thinking this week about uncertainty. Now, if you've been listening along, you will have heard me remind you that we start by giving you a great big dose of certainty. We've also been talking about the stories that you tell yourself. We've been talking about optimism. Today, we're going to be thinking about celebration and thanksgiving. Now, the Bible is full of so many examples of times where it says give thanks or be thankful. Many examples, and I'm not going to read any of those examples to you. Instead, I'm going to give you an example from Exodus. It's actually Exodus chapter 23, where God instituted the idea of having a festival or a feast or a time of celebration. Now, the internet tells me, I haven't checked this, but on the internet tells me that there are actually 7 official sacred celebration moments in the Jewish calendar. I'm going to introduce you to 3 of them. I know of at least another one which isn't mentioned here. So there's loads of examples. What's interesting to me is actually God instituted as part of their celebration, a part of them doing faith. And yes, you might be a Jesus geek, and you might be a Jesus geek who's also a Jew. That happens too. But everything that's in the Bible, the Old Testament, although it's the Jewish Bible, it's also our Christian Bible too. And as I often said, I think I've already said this week, in fact, that when we read stuff, it doesn't matter whether it's in the Old Testament or the New Testament. That's God's instruction to you. Now, I'll read it first, but what I will just say is I'm not suggesting that you suddenly need to start celebrating all of the festivals. Let's just read that first of all. This is Exodus chapter 23. So celebrate. 3 times a year you are to celebrate a festival to me, says God. Celebrate the festival of unleavened bread. For 7 days, eat bread made without yeast, as I commanded you. Do this at the appointed time in the month of Aviv, for in that month you came out of Egypt. No one is to appear before me empty-handed. Celebrate the festival of harvest with the first fruits of the crops you sow in your field. Celebrate the festival of ingathering at the end of the year, when you gather in your crops from the field. Now, it's interesting, actually. We do have the harvest Thanksgiving services across the churches, across the UK, and I imagine they must do it in America and Canada and other parts of the world as well. So although I'm not suggesting that you suddenly need to start celebrating all of the Jewish festivals, but it is interesting to me that God instituted in the law this time of celebration. Now, what does this have to do with uncertainty? That's a fair question. It comes back again to what we've already mentioned this week, the reticular activating system. It's not all it's to do with, in fact, but for the purposes of what I want to share with you, and from a brain science perspective, it comes back to the reticular activating system. Philippians 4 verse 8, I think it is, one of my favorite verses, talks about, Paul basically says, think lovely thoughts. Yes, I'm paraphrasing, but he says, if anything is lovely, if anything is praiseworthy, or anything is good, if anything is trustworthy, think about such things. God knew that the way your brain is wired is that the things that you think about, the things that you reflect on, the things that you pay attention to, your brain will filter in more and more examples of those things. If by contrast, and we did talk about this a little bit earlier in the week, if by contrast you tend to focus on, think about those negative stories and those negative happenings, your brain will spiral downwards. And we don't want that. My goal is to help you spiral upwards instead. Now, what this has to do with the festivals, of course, is that God is saying, celebrate. Now, you're not going to necessarily have a harvest festival in your home. Instead, I want to encourage you to start celebrating the wins. Now, this will help your uncertainty by giving you a great big dose of certainty again. So every time, and we do it in the Playground very specifically on a Friday as part of our weekly get-together, we also have a hashtag for it as well, that you can celebrate those wins any time of the week. If something good happens, if something wonderful happens, if something you're just like, yeah, I did it. Maybe you've been putting something off, celebrate that in some way, share it with somebody. Because the lovely thing is that by actually paying attention to that stuff, your brain will start to filter in more of the same. And the more uplifted and the more positive and the more optimistic you can feel about this stuff, the easier it becomes to deal with the uncertainty. Because you will always have uncertainty in your life. There will always be times where life feels a little bit like my ball of Christmas lights I mentioned yesterday. Ideally, not all of life is like that all of the time. I mean, that's what we talked about earlier in the week, of course, is that reminder that generally speaking, your uncertainty won't cover all of life. But even those times of uncertainty, they can feel like that ball of Christmas lights. My goal is for you to have times that don't feel like that. We want to have times where things just feel easeful and sweet and lovely and delightful and just gently moving and flowing through life. Those days are great. And when we have days like that, enjoy it, because this too shall pass. This is the nature of life. It is up and down, ebbs and flows. So if the more that you can sort of protect yourself, and the more that you can actually start putting these practices in place from the get-go of how to deal with those uncertainties, the easier it will be to actually get through them and up them and rise up despite the stuff that's going on around you. This is the goal of this series, and anything I share with you is never to relieve that uncertainty. I mentioned Tony Robbins and his human needs psychology at the start of the week. His philosophy or his model is that actually as humans we need certainty and uncertainty. And so if you were to get rid of all uncertainty in your life, you'd be pretty bored. If you knew every single thing that was going to happen all the time, how tedious would that be? No, I accept that if right now things are feeling really uncertain, you might go, oh, do you know what, Elle? I would love that. Yeah, okay, you might feel like that right now, but the reality is that if every single aspect of your life was already planned and you knew exactly what it's going to look like, it would be dull and you would be bored and there would be no pleasure to be had. So this is not about getting rid of uncertainty. This is instead about equipping you and giving you the tools to thrive even amongst the uncertainty. Because actually, if you plug in that bundle of Christmas lights, even when they're tangled together, as long as there's no short circuit, they will still light up and look beautiful. So that's I like that little analogy. That's what I want for you. I want to help work with the circuitry in your brain and the way that you look at these things and move forward, so that even when your life is a bit of a bundle of tangles, you can still shine. That's my goal. I hope this series this week has been helpful for you. If you've got any questions or if you're not sure about something, depending on where you're listening to this or watching this, you can send me a message. But I would really, if you'd like some actual personalized attention, my real invitation to you is the Faith and Business Playground. That's where I do all of my work with some other wonderful people, other Jesus geeks like you. Anyway, faithandbusinessplayground.com is what you need for that. I shall be back next week. Next week, I believe we're going to be thinking about overwhelm. That's one for you. So if you're somebody who, as well as having everything feeling a little bit uncertain, you find yourself getting overwhelmed, make sure you tune in. But in the meantime, thank you for being here. I look forward to catching up with you soon. Take care. Bye-bye.